Kia ora, and welcome to Constellations and All That. I'm your host, Tracy Cartwright, and together we will be exploring the world of family constellations with facilitators and clients from around the world, looking at different perspectives and experiences in the work, having a cup of tea and just chatting with some friends around their experiences in constellations. We'd love for you to join us. I hope that you enjoy this series as much as I have loved making it. Kia ora, welcome to Constellations and All That. Today I'm going to just share a few things about constellations, and this has come about from a conversation that I've had with a very dear friend of mine, Vicky. Vicky, I hope this answers a few more of your questions. So one of them, she pointed out that if you know nothing about constellations, it could sound a bit woo-woo and it could sound a little bit like members only, or it's a little bit cliquey. I personally don't feel that way, but this is coming from an outside perspective. So she's asked me, where did constellations start? And there's two parts to this for me. So constellations started with a gentleman called Bert Hellinger, who brought this through in the 80s. He originally had been a missionary in Africa, working with the Zulus. So prior to being in Africa, he was a young gentleman in Germany, and he was conscripted to the war. And during that time, in a very short period of time, he found himself a prisoner of war, to which obviously he survived. And through that time, he was very interested in people, and he had a very strong faith. So he became a priest when he was released from the prison. He went into the priesthood, and then he went to Africa, where he was with the Zulus for 16 years. And you can imagine, coming from Germany, very lineal, structured ways of thinking, to Zulu country where there was much more tradition and connected to the greater picture of things in a different way to religion and that which we know in the Western world. So one of the things that, this is my understanding and this is my take on it, and many facilitators will have their own takes on this, but this is the way it was shared with me and how I share it with my students, that he admired the way that the Zulus would, if someone had an issue, if someone had something that was going on, maybe something that wasn't working for them or something that happened in the community, then they would come together as a community and they would look at the person not just as an individual, but what's going on in their system, what's going on in their family, in the culture of the country or in the community in which they live in. So that would be a greater, more systemic look at things. And that opened Bert's awareness to another way of thinking. When he left Africa, he also left the priesthood, and he went on to study psychology and theology and many other family therapies. And then during the 80s, sometime during the 80s, we would call it a download these days. He would have called it the answer to a prayer. He may have been in meditation, and from that came constellation work. So that's a little bit about Bert Hellinger. For me, I always share that I know that this is ancient work and it comes from the people of our fires. We all come from the people of the fire originally, and that our ancestors will have done this work on some level, some way, shape or form. Obviously, it would have been different. There's a lot more of the psychology side of things into it these days, but the energy medicine side of it, the energy, the expansive and the somatic and the working in the morphogenic field of the unknown, all of that is definitely work of our ancestors. So there's a little take on that. I hope that answers the questions for a few people. What does having a constellation mean? Good question, because that's kind of our lingo, isn't it? Like, there's a little bit of constellation talk. Are you going to have a constellation? When I got constellated. So a constellation, we call it family constellations. If you imagine a cluster of things that belong together. So if you were to think about the stars as a constellation, that all the stars that belong in one constellation all have their place. And it's the same for our family soul and our family system, that everybody belongs in our family soul. So that makes that a constellation for us, a constellation of things that belong together. So having a constellation generally is referred to when you get to come and work with a facilitator, either one-on-one, in person, online, or in a group session. That's having a piece of work done, having a session, or having a constellation. When you have a constellation, you get to sit in what we call the hot seat or the client seat. Some facilitators are now doing it where you may be sitting in circle, and rather than having someone come to your hot seat or your client seat, you're working across the room from each other. But generally in a workshop, and this is how I usually run it, that someone would come and sit to my right. And the reason I put them at the right is because in the orders of love and the orders of flow, when you're sitting to the right, that is the hierarchy of these people came first in this system. So when they're sitting in the hot seat or the client seat, the seeker seat, whatever you want to call it, they are the authority of their own system. So I'm a visitor to that system, to that family system that I'm about to do some work with them in. Because they come first in that system, they sit to my right. So that is sitting in the hot seat. When you sit in the hot seat, generally you have a constellation. Sometimes it's just a conversation. And yes, it does sound, the energy in the hot seat can be what it sounds like. It gets hot because we're bringing forward movement. And as we know, when energy expands and contracts, it creates warmth or cold or coolness. That's sitting in the hot seat. Another question was, what are some of the common themes that happen in family systems? Well, if you go onto my website, there's a file on there that talks about some of the common things that happen, and so these are questions that are asked, like, for example, around missing children, missing babies. So in a family system, when there is someone who's missing, or a stillborn, or a miscarriage, or a termination that hasn't been acknowledged, and like I shared earlier about everyone in the family system having a place, then that creates a hole within our system, and so that can create all sorts of chaos and entanglements, burdens, can lead to depression and anxiety, all sorts of different things from there. And I think most family systems, somewhere in there, there's potentially, you know, our ancestors really did lose a lot of babies through the illnesses, through the consumption, tuberculosis, which is obviously consumption, and through the Spanish flu, and a lot of earlier tragedies. And they didn't have the time or the resources that we have today to be able to lean into the grief. So it would be shoved down, never spoken about. The families where the son goes off to war and dies, and the mother can never speak his name again because she's heartbroken. So the family's not allowed to mention the brother, and then when he's not mentioned, he gets forgotten. And then later on, someone else comes along in the family system who wants to unconsciously give this person a place. Might not even know anything about this person, but because he is a part of the family soul on an unconscious level, there will be a calling or a pulling towards giving this person a place in the system. So what happens when you go to a workshop? Well, there are many things that can happen. Generally, it's done in a circle. I guess it depends on the venue, but generally we would sit in circle. And when you come to a workshop with me, we get to drink some yummy, delicious cacao to help us feel more present in our bodies and to open our hearts. We would all share who we are and maybe what we've come for. Some people come with the intention that they want to work, and others come with the intention that they want to support those that are here today, on the day, because a lot of people often recognize that just by coming to a workshop, they get a lot out of it by being part of holding and supporting and being of service in the field. So when you come, you represent, maybe you represent, you can always say no. You're allowed to say no to representing because it's all about you taking care of yourself as well. So when I'm talking about representing, it's another word is resonating for someone. So you would generally, the facilitator and the client will have had a conversation. Try to keep it as brief as possible because we don't want to get stuck in the story. look at what we're aiming towards, what we're looking to clear, or what we're moving towards in the future. And then you might be asked to represent. So, say, for example, you're asked to represent someone's mother. You're not given any examples of who she is or how to stand or anything. It's around trusting yourself, trusting your body, feeling the energy that's there. And sometimes you don't feel anything at all, and that's absolutely fine as well, because sometimes it means it shows up that there is some numbness in the system. And generally, with numbness, it's the things that we don't want to see, right? So we're blanking things out, blocking things out. So we would do exercises as well as constellations. We'll have conversations after the exercises, and often people report that by witnessing or by representing, they've been able to heal a lot of their own things in their family system because of the themes and the threads that run through us human beings. There's no typical day that I could share with you what would happen in a constellation, but I think that we could generally say a group of willing souls get together with the intention to shift the pain that is blocking us from moving forward and thriving in our lives. And we talk and we share, and sometimes people cry, or sometimes say it's maybe there's some seasonal allergies that need to be released. One last question. After a constellation, how is it best to allow the changes to embody them and integrate them? Wow, that's good questions. So after a constellation, I always suggest that people don't talk about it. And it's not because it's a secret. It's usually give it a week, maybe two, definitely 1 week. And that allows for the energy to settle, because after a constellation, things can be expansive, but very still at the same time. And so if we're going in and we're thinking about it all and we're pulling things apart, maybe analyzing what had happened in the workshop or the one-on-one, then it's kind of like you've woven a beautiful cloak around yourself, and the facilitators help to weave this beautiful cloak around yourself, and then you're pulling it apart by thinking about it. So I always suggest to people that they name colors or ice cream flavors or flowers, count numbers, anything that would take you out of the thought process that would potentially pull it apart. And also not to share it with your friends or family for a week, just to, again, let that settle into the system. Drinking lots of water. I always suggest also that people go home after a workshop, either jump in the ocean, in the river, have a shower or a bath. Allow the water to help you to integrate, to help you to clear your energy fields and to help you integrate. Drinking lots of water for your cells as well. Be kind to yourself and yeah, and have fun doing it. So that's just a little bit more about constellations, and I hope that's been helpful for whoever needed to hear that today. Thank you for listening. Ka kite. Thank you for listening. Head over to Instagram and tell me what's resonated for you with this episode. You'll find me at tracy.cartwright. That's Tracy with no E, .cartwright. Or head over to my website, tracycartwright.co.nz, and receive a free audio with the gift from your ancestors. So until next time, be kind to yourself and have fun doing it.